This is the Neo Show, where the minds shaping tomorrow speak today. Brought to you by Neo, the browser redefining what AI can do for you.
Jennifer, welcome to Gen Digital for this, we call it Meet the CEO, the Neo Show. We invite the CEO of startups or mid-sized company, talk about what they do. But more importantly, sort of the AI wave, right? What's going to happen, what's already happening, what's going to happen, all that kind of thing. So it's going to be a pretty casual conversation. And then towards the end, we will open the floor for people to ask questions. So that's first. Why don't you introduce yourself? Because you and I got to know each other, at Greylock 10 years ago, and wonderful colleague. We kept in touch. But you went on to do something on your own. Just tell us, what you do and also how you got here. Actually, more importantly.
Yeah, you came to the Greylock partner meeting, and you shared a bit about yourself and your life. And I remember thinking at the time, like, gosh, what a nice guy. And I don't know if you know this, but as you walked out of the room, everybody turned to each other like, man, he's just the nicest person any of us have ever met. And that's just held up true the whole time that I've known you. So I appreciate
Thank you. You actually never told me that story. Thanks for letting me know.
It's one of those examples of people talking behind your back, saying really nice things. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scribe. I'll maybe share my quick background, not because it's particularly interesting, but it's relevant to the problem that we solve here at Scribe. So before we met at Greylock, I spent a bunch of years at McKinsey as a consultant in the orgs and ops practice. That's a really fancy way of saying, think like 200, 250 days a year on a plane, going to big operation centers in places like Ohio and Salt Lake City to figure out how to make them more efficient. And the trick was to find the best person in the ops center. And I would just ask them, why are you better than everybody else here? And they'd pull out these really thick binders with laminated pages of step-by-step guides. And they'd say, I was told to do this, but I don't actually do that, right? I found a whole bunch of better ways. And so we'd pull up a chair and look over their shoulder and literally create a new manual. And we'd give it to the head of the ops center. And we'd say, here, if you can just get everybody to do what your best person does, you raise the performance of everybody on your team in a highly instrumented environment that's actually worth a lot of money. And we would charge about $1 million a month for that. And I thought it was really crazy at the time that was the state of the art best practice. And I said, someone will clearly improve upon this someday. And then I kind of moved on.
Sorry, you charge $1 million to do what? Just for...
Well, we were raising the performance of the overall operation center. The way that we would do it would be to find the best people and basically codify what they did.
Right,
and
but
then,
what is the $1 million thing?
That's just the fees.
Okay. It's
the fees consulting firms charge for this kind of work.
They don't do the work. They just tell people how to do the work.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
That is the business model. Yeah, believe it or not. And then I kind of moved on with my life and then found myself here at Greylock. And, obviously we talk a lot in the Valley about how to sell software, but we got really curious about why people buy software. And so we spent a lot of time there talking to large enterprise buyers. I counted when I left. I talked to over 1,200 people. And I would just ask them, like, what are the kinds of problems you're trying to solve? What do you wish Silicon Valley was building and investing in? And as you can imagine, I heard a whole bunch of different themes. And one of the big ones was around this idea of institutional know-how. They didn't use that word, but it was this idea of like, hey, I have all these people and they show up to work every day and their fingers on keyboard, they're trying to create value. And I see all the inputs, right? I spent a lot of time thinking about the software to buy for them. We see the salaries we pay for them. And then I see the outputs. And by the way, those are pretty variable. I've got a team in Ohio and a team in Florida, and they do the same thing, but they have very different outcomes and I have no idea why. But I have no way to observe or understand the transformation of work. Like, what are people actually doing all day when their fingers on keyboard? Like, how do we actually create value here? Like, quite tactically, what are the tactical things that we do? It's a very important asset for any company, and it's not something they actually own. It just lives in people's heads as institutional know-how, and they share it kind of through oral tradition, frankly. It's a lot of people kind of asking and answering questions to each other. Maybe they spend time out of the goodness of their heart documenting it, usually after hours. But the vast majority of it is never captured in any way that they can share. And so that was the whole idea behind Scribe. Like, we can solve this with
So
technology.
even before you started a Scribe, you were at Greylock. Greylock is a fantastic firm, right? Incubated companies like Palo Alto Network, Workday, led a very early investment in Facebook, Figma of the world. It's a pretty good firm. Why did you decide even to do a startup? And then is that because you interact with entrepreneurs all day long and you felt like, okay, it's crazy not to do a startup, or you wanted to do a startup even before going to Greylock? Like what went on?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say there was some master plan, right? And it was a calculated move. It wasn't at all. I went to venture because I liken it to an intellectual Candyland. Like, you show up and some of the smartest, most motivated people in the world walk through the doors and they tell you their ideas and dreams. And even if you don't share their passion for distributed storage or whatever it might be, like, I found that to be very contagious and infectious. And it was like, kind of a mini MBA in startups. I think, when I reflected on it though, because you're sort of in the day to day and you're really enjoying it. And I think when I kind of stepped back, I liken it to, like, when you go to a fancy party and you're really hungry and they have a lot of past hors d'oeuvres and you eat all the cool little fancy shiny things and like each one tastes really great. And then at the end of the party, you're like, man, I feel full, but like I'm still hungry. That's how I felt about venture. I was like, I just want a steak. Like, I want something that I can just really sink my teeth into and like commit for a long period of time. And I actually took a little bit of time off after Greylock to think about what that would mean for me. It sounds a little corny. I like went to my local park and I journaled every day for months about what was important to me. And the thing I realized is I wanted to be proud of what I did at the end of my career. And to me, that meant building something. I wanted to build something. And ideally, it was something that endured beyond me, that I could see my fingerprints on, and that I did with a team of people that I was really, I really cared about and was really proud to be part of. And I didn't care whether that was my thing or someone else's thing. But the problem we're solving at Scribe is one I've been obsessed with for a really long time.
So give us a little bit more concrete idea what the product looks like, or what problem does it solve?
Yeah. So the question was, what does the product look like, and what problem does it solve? So our first product was very simple in concept, which is we will watch people do work. We will automatically capture what they know how to do. And then we will share that with colleagues, customers, clients, anybody who needs to know how to do that process.
When you say watch, what does that mean? Literally standing next to someone, or you have a piece of software on the computer? What does the watch mean?
It's a desktop application or a Chrome extension that you download and you hit a record button and you do the thing that you're an expert in doing. You're in finance and you're processing, quarter end close. You are in HR and you are onboarding a new employee in Canada. Whatever it is that you are an expert in, you hit the record button and you just do the thing you normally would do anyways. And we'll automatically build documentation on how to do that process. So the basic primitive is a step-by-step guide with screenshots and automatically built instructions. You can export that in a whole bunch of ways. You could convert that to a video. You can convert that into a walkthrough in the piece of software. So let's just take the Workday example for a second. Okay, I onboarded a new employee in Canada into Workday. There's now a canonical workflow on how to do that here at this company. And I can now push that to anybody in my HR team in Canada, so that when they go to onboard somebody new, it'll just walk them through in the application. So in Workday, it'll show them where to click. We'll say, like, click here.
So
click
what's
here,
the difference
type this.
between that versus just taking a screenshot, start a screenshot, a movie, and then save it as a download file? Like, what do you do on top of that?
Yeah, that's what a lot of our users were doing before they found Scribe. If they were doing anything at all. The thing I say we mostly replace is people not sharing this information. It's just living in their heads, and maybe they hop on a Zoom meeting, or like someone taps their shoulder or asks them a question and they sort of answer it and you get that back and forth.
So you basically make the sharing workflow a lot easier, a lot more natural. That's the value.
The capturing is automatic. It's almost like documentation has become digital exhaust. You do the thing you normally would do anyways, and as a byproduct, it's just creating all of this documentation. And then
But do you have to think about it? When do I start or when do I stop? Or when I get into the office, I just turn it on. And then at the end of the day, it will save a few interesting snippets.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the original product, you had to hit the record button on. What we heard from users was, oh man, sometimes I forgot to hit the record button and I did like 5 really interesting things today. Could you proactively pull that out for me? And so we just released our second product that takes it much farther, and I'm happy to talk about that. But one piece of what it does do is exactly what you said. It'll look back proactively and it'll say, hey, actually you did 5 things today. Do you want to export those into Scribe?
And then where do you upload this thing to? To your cloud? Do people worry, do your clients or customers worry about the security or privacy? How do you think about it?
Yeah, look, we've had to build privacy and security in from day one. Because if you think about what we're doing, we're watching your workflows across your most important applications. And so there's all kinds of not just sensitive information, potentially PII on the screen, but even just the knowledge of how we do this thing here. One of the big banks that we went wall to wall with was because the CISO, someone sent the CISO a Scribe. And the CISO was like, this is really great. We can use this in security to document how we do threat remediation. Then he was like, but that's actually really critical IP. And I want to really control who understands how we do this critical workflow here. So there are a bunch of things that we've done on both the privacy and security side. I mean, one of the simple ones is there's something called the smart privacy screen. So we will auto redact any sensitive information from screenshots before they're ever stored. Okay, so if you have PII on your screen, names, email addresses, you can configure this as much or as little as you would want, as you can imagine. It's automatically blurring it on the screen. We don't want it. You don't want to give it to us. We just don't capture it. And that's been really important because we're used by 97% of the Fortune 500 at this point. Over 45%, we have a free version of the product. Over 45% of the Fortune 500 is a paying customer. We've worked with some of the biggest banks, healthcare companies, folks in really regulated industries from the beginning. And so we had to build this in very, very earlier than I think you would expect most startups to do, just because of the nature of the content that we're capturing and who we were working with.
Right. I think you have, 5 million users?
We do,
right?
yeah.
And then what's the breakdown? Like a vast majority in the small business or vast majority in the Fortune 500 or Fortune 2000? Like what is the sort of the profile of the user?
Yeah, this is maybe one of the things that's most interesting about our business is it's incredibly horizontal. I think it's really hard to kind of understand maybe from the outside in. But if you look at our user base and you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just like what does the US workforce look like? We look representative. So across company size, across industry, even across functions within a company, right? We're used in everything from operations to finance and compliance to
but do you have a sweet
facing
spot?
teams.
Like for instance, financial is a sweet spot, or medium-sized company or small business. Like is there any sweet spot? Not even that.
No, this is what's really interesting. Very counter to all the advice we got in the very early days, where folks would say you cannot be so horizontal. Like you have to pick. And we spent a lot of time really grappling with this question.
So you ignored all the advices you heard at Greylock.
And sure, of course, all the smart people at Greylock would say not to do what we did. But we felt the pull from the market. And I think it's because the problem we solve, which is the need to get people to do a process a particular way, is quite ubiquitous when you look along traditional lines of industry, function, company size. Your local school districts has a need to make sure that people are following certain processes correctly, right? Just as much as a big bank does. And so we serve everything from literally your local government to fast-growing nonprofits to some of the biggest, most regulated Fortune 10 companies in the world.
So how do you think about return on investment? For instance, tell us like, is that a $20 a month or a different charge model, pricing model? And then also, how do I measure the value I'm getting out of it?
Yeah, we think about this a lot because it's really important to us that we deliver a ton of customer value. We think a lot more about how to deliver value than we do to capture it, actually. And so you could probably argue that we're quite underpriced relative to the value. So you could get started on Scribe for free or swiping a credit card, and it starts at, like $15 a person per month. Our customers will think about ROI in different ways, depending on what they're trying to solve for. The most common denominator, the easiest thing for anybody to ever look at is time savings, right? And so we have customers who have done detailed time studies of their own people. We have done our own surveys across the customer base. And very interesting, they have all triangulated between 35 to 42 hours per person per month of time saved using Scribe. So that's one work week.
Wait a second.
A
Why
month.
is that? For instance, I'm using Scribe. I kind of record on my screen. Let's say I do expense reports all day long. Then what value am I getting by using Scribe?
Yeah, you don't even have to be doing expense reports all day long, right? It doesn't have to be something quite so rote all the time. So there's two things. One is the time you're saving and having to share that information with other people. So that could have showed up in you doing the copy paste screenshot in your Microsoft Word document, whatever. That could have showed up as you answering a bunch of questions that people were asking you constantly on how to do this process. And then for the person on the other side who has to just take your example, file an expense report, now when they go to do that, they're just following your Scribe and it's getting pushed to them rather than them having to spend time trying to go and find the information.
So it's a little bit like Slack. There's no value unless I have a group of people using the same product, right? Meaning that if I just use it myself within this company, probably there's a very little value. I have to get if I do expense report, I need to get my fellow colleagues in the finance department to use it as well, like a junior guy's onboarding, or how to think about it.
Yeah. So this is actually really important to our growth. We've thought a lot about what the growth loops look like because we're a product-led growth company, right? And so the way that we grow is through end users. And there are these wonderful viral loops in the product because to your observation, I never create a Scribe, which is like a step-by-step guide on how to do something. Like I'm not doing that it's not a personal note-taking application. Like I'm only ever doing that to share that information with somebody else, right? Now, to get started, you don't have to share it with somebody in Scribe. They don't also have to be a Scribe user. And so this is really helpful to us. You can embed that in hundreds of different tools. And so people might get started and embed it in their Confluence or their internal wiki or their LMS, I don't know, their Salesforce, all of these different places that you can go put it. So this is what happens. Usually we have one person who gets really excited about Scribe, often because they heard about it from a friend. We have deeply invested in end user love. We're in the top 1% NPS for all software. So what we get is people who are like evangelists. Like they will run around and host lunch and learns at their office here. They'll like go show people on their computers. They text their friends. And so we'll find there's
do you pay them for those enthusiasts?
No, we actually don't know them in most instances, right? This is just something they're doing because they're like, oh my gosh, I found something I'm really excited about and I'm sharing.
So there is a community, Reddit community or whatnot. Do you have a community?
We do have a community of folks who can come more if they want to interact with the Scribe team or get involved with each other, certainly. A lot of this word of mouth activity that I'm talking about happens outside of the community as well. It's just like it's purely people at a company who get excited about something and want to share it.
Very interesting. I'll shift the topic a little bit towards AI. When did you start a company? It must be before ChatGPT moment, I know, because we discussed quite a bit.
Yeah.
When ChatGPT hit, but when did you start a company?
Yeah, we started it in 2019.
2019. So it's been 6 years. And then 2022, November 2022, 3 years ago, ChatGPT moment came. Mm-hmm. What was the impact to you? Because a lot of what you are doing today, in theory, would be augmented a lot by today's GPT technology, right? For instance, understanding the video, the multimodality. Yeah. What is your take?
Yeah. So, we started in 2019 before LLMs were what they are. We use computer vision and kind of other AI takes, obviously not LLMs. LLMs have changed our world in some ways dramatically and in some ways not so much. So let me explain. I think one of the biggest insights for us in building Scribe is that workflows are very specific to a particular team, a particular company. You can have two teams with the same remit at competitors with the same tool stack, and they're just going to do things really different ways. And so if you are trying to ask any kind of question of any kind of, generic LLM, like how do we do this thing here, that data set does not exist. And LLMs are really excellent when you have trained them with the right set of data. but there is no workflow data today that exists within any enterprise that they could train any LLM on. And so you actually can't use anything like ChatGPT or any of the other kind of leading LLM providers. You can't use any of that to do anything that Scribe, that our first product did. Where it does change things for us dramatically is one of the questions we have gotten from customers from the very beginning has been, okay, great. You can help me understand the best of what my company knows how to do today and then disseminate that across everybody. So you're raising the performance of everybody to kind of my best person. Okay, now anybody can do any process as well as the expert the first time, every time they do it. That's great. But how can I be even better? Like you're telling me what I am doing, what should I be doing? And that's actually a really hard question pre-LLM to answer because we're talking about an enormous data set. And it really was something like we didn't have the technology to be able to solve at the time. And we do now. And so that's been really exciting for us.
What would be an example of what should I be doing just for me to understand? Like what would be a good example?
So it depends who you are, right? But every executive that I meet with that is kind of forward thinking in any way is saying, okay, what am I not doing today that I should be? A very simple one is always automating. Like, what workflows are being done by humans today that are just not a good use of human time that I should be automating? And if you are the COO of a Fortune 500 company, that is a really hard question for you to answer at any kind of scale, actually. Right?
And
Think
the
about it.
Scribe product can help answering this question because you recorded a lot of the humans workflow and then you can identify, hey, this part, it's kind of we should just write an agent to automate it, that sort of things.
Yeah, exactly. So we just released our second product precisely for this, which is that same kind of, as I said before, you have to hit the record button. Now it passively can mine across set of whitelisted applications. So whatever your kind of core applications are within a company, we anonymize the data. But we can now present in a single pane of glass for the first time to any kind of senior leader, like, here are the workflows actually being done by your team today. Like, here's the work, here's how it's done, the different variations, here's how long it takes, et cetera. And then here are ways you can improve that. And we can, it's an agent, so you can, of course, prompt it, chat with it, take it to kind of whatever level of specificity you would want. But it helps you actually drive transformation because it can understand the way things are done today and then where you want to go and then help give you the steps from how do I get from here to there and build the ROI business case. Because it knows how often is that being done, by whom, for how long, and what would it look like under the new proposed state. And that's data that's just never existed before.
So if a CEO of a Fortune 500 company can really get that question answered in an intelligent way, that could be multi-million-dollar value, right? Depending on what the finding is. The other part of the AI impact to your company is not just for the product, but also productivity. You are the CEO of the company. You look at the marketing, engineering. By the way, how many people in the company now?
We are 150 people. We are quite small.
Okay.
For
you raised the current valuation. Congratulations on the new latest round, the 1.3 billion valuation. Do you expect to increase the headcount much because of the new funding? And then I would also love to hear about how AI is being applied in the variety of different functions as well.
Yeah. We certainly will grow. We'll probably about double headcount in the next year across PPD, go-to-market, kind of all the various functions, building out sales, all of that. It's hard to know what would the headcount needs have been without AI. All I can say is I think if you look at our current size by revenue, users, kind of all of those things, I think historical benchmarks would say we should probably be more like 300 people today. And so we're able to do all of this with quite fewer people. And I think part of that is a cultural thing. It's maybe not surprising. We care a lot about efficiency as a company, and I do personally. And so we are very thoughtful about how to do things in the most efficient way possible. And then I think the other thing is, because we've been able to can kind of build from the ground up and sort of through this period of just like much more advanced tooling, we're able to have people who are much more productive.
Can you share with us some of the tools that's used a lot in the company, AI tools?
Yeah. I mean, there's sort of like the obvious ones within engineering. Cursor is probably our main one, but we've told engineers, like use kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom. You sort of like, can kind of pick what you want to be doing on individual products and we'll sort of see what works best for us as a team. That's actually kind of what our philosophy has been across the board because we have so few people. We're able to kind of say like, okay, you pick the tools that you want to be trying out and then we'll sort of share up the case study and decide if we need to standardize together as a team. Our user acquisition, maybe just to pick some like kind of maybe sexier examples, our user acquisition team spends a lot of time putting together, like paid ads and things like that. We have experimented with making that all AI generated. Those have not performed as well as the human generated ones yet. I know for some companies.
So what tool do you use for the user acquisition?
Actually, I don't know which video tool they used for it. I know they were trying a mix of different things.
You mean those video generation?
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
They were doing video generation. And that didn't fully work. But what they realized was they could use script generation and like basic mock of video generation to get all the way to final production. And then we could cut down the time and cost to final production dramatically as a result.
So you mentioned the Cursor for engineering team. What's the current state? Like, for instance, most of engineers use Cursor to generate a code, and then their job is only to review code only, or you're only halfway there. Like, well, what's the current state?
I think we still have a long ways to go. We're at maybe about a third of code is AI generated right now. I'm curious. I don't know if you guys share where you're at. And we're constantly trying to like push the boundary of what that looks like. I think one of the things that's been really interesting to us is to see kind of the reception in engineering, because that's the average and like the distribution across engineers is pretty wide. And I think it has to do a bit with kind of, an individual engineer's proclivity, because we don't have a mandate, right? It's sort of whatever folks want to do. The other thing we realized is it actually, I think it had to do with folks' early experiences using a particular tool. So like Cursor, for example, it's better at some use cases than others. And so if someone tried something that it was really great at, they were like, this thing is amazing. And they like doubled down on it. And I think kind of overcame maybe a bit of the learning curve to figure out the edges and how to use it. And then I think if someone had a not great first experience on it and they're like, oh, this thing's not ready for prime time yet. And so I'm just going to invest less time in it. And so part of what we're thinking about is like, how do we set this up so that it looks a bit more uniform across the board?
How do you think about the organization overall? Like, how do you do a different org design because of the AI? Like, if yes, can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I was just at a conference with CEOs of companies kind of similar size to ours, and then kind of some more of the hyperscalers. And this was a very heated discussion, as you can imagine. And I'd say that the consensus was everybody saying they will probably hire less than they would have otherwise, to kind of varying extents. To some folks saying that, the way they're building JDs now is as human agent mix. And now thinking about they use the term cyborg. I don't take that that's not the term I would use. But I'll maybe say a bit more broadly, thinking about people as now managers of agents. And how do you hire for that particular skill set? And one of the things that I think is really funny is, a lot of CEOs are like, oh, I'm only going to hire AI native people now. And I was like, well, what the heck does that mean? I mean, like if you're talking about LLMs specifically, unless you're talking about researchers, okay, that's a totally different thing. But if I'm talking about hiring like an AI native salesperson or something, like it's only been around for a few years for their career. And so unless they're straight out of college, like what you're really describing is somebody who has the adaptability to think about using new tools in novel ways. And I think it's the same kind of person who throughout their entire career has been looking at this, like, how do I get more leverage? They're constantly trying to ask, like, how do I get more leverage? How do I have more impact? And so I think it's the same sets of things. And so that's in some ways it's changed the way that we think about hiring, but in other ways we haven't, because as a startup, those are the kinds of people we were always trying to hire anyways.
You want people who can adapt, who are embracing new tools,
Yes.
who are curious anyways, right?
Who want change, they
Right,
seek change.
right. I think, people who are willing to adapt or, embracing more AI tools, to me, those are relatively speaking more AI native generation. It's not the age, but it's the mentality, right? That's at least how I think about it. So from your point of view, you feel like at the hiring level, you are kind of paying attention to this AI thing, but on the other hand, it's not a drastic move away from your past practice because you are looking for that kind of the people even before the ChatGPT moment, right?
That's right.
What about
because we'll meet people who will say, oh, I'm really excited about these sets of AI tools. I came from a place that didn't embrace that. And so we're not going to hire that person just because they didn't have experience with those things, but the fact that they were curious and had thought about it and maybe had some opinions and had tried it out on its own, like those are all indicators. So they wouldn't check the box from an experience perspective, but they do from an intrinsics perspective. And like we care much more about that.
Do you observe like the line between different job functions or department functions or different teams getting more blurry so that because of AI tools, right, people can do things beyond what they used to do? Do you observe that? And how do you kind of address that?
Yeah, yes and no, because again, I think it comes back to the kinds of people and they self-select, right? I mean, when we're a 150 person growing really quickly, there are certain kinds of people who self-select into that environment. And so they tend to be people who say things like, I want to wear multiple hats. I want to be involved cross-functionally. Like part of the value to me of coming to work, I may be a salesperson, but it's that I know engineering is sitting, down the hall and that I get that kind of interaction. And so in some ways, no, because people were doing this already anyway.
That's very interesting because, I also noticed that as well because, a lot of the things we as a company, we are doing this AI first initiative, right? When I think about the traits and the characteristics, to me is a lot more like startup, right? Because if you are kind of operator like startup, to me, the AI first is already there or almost there. What about the, there's also a notion that because of AI, well, there are different school of thoughts here in that there are people who think, well, because of AI, I no longer need to hire junior people anymore because ChatGPT is my junior analyst, junior whatever. And I need to hire less, for my next hire, I want to hire senior people who has domain knowledge and then that sort of thing. But then there's also people on the other side of the camp who is like, okay, everything will be disrupted, right? I'd rather hire people who has the energy, who can adapt, who's curious. And then, age aside, there is, notion that the junior people, they don't have the boundary. They don't have 20 years of the working history. So naturally they can adapt faster. So let me just hire those kind of the junior people, and then they are more AI native potentially. So how do you think about when you look for the hires, the senior versus junior or whatever the considerations you have?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there are people who believe very passionately on both sides of this and kind of structure their orgs accordingly. I think the answer is you need to have a mix, and I think we in the early days of building really oriented towards people who are strong first principles problem solvers and thinkers. And by the way, I think those are the same people who become AI native because they're the kind of people who are just constantly searching for like, how do I get the most leverage? How do I make the most impact? And I'm going to use every tool available to me and be a rapid learning machine in how I use that. But what you miss is folks who have seen the movie before. And so we spent time, I think, first principling our way to what ended up being very good answers, but it probably took us it took us longer to get there than if we had somebody who could be there and be like, okay, guys, I can see around the corner. Like I've seen hyperscale before, and I know we're going to start facing these issues in 6 months. And so we need to do this today to be able to see around that. And so I think you actually need a mix. You don't need that many people who have seen the movie before, but you need some folks who I think can help guide, here's where we're headed and we're trying to get there. And then you need folks who are going to be the adaptable, curious, flexible problem solvers. And so we've had a lot of great luck hiring folks who are relatively junior. I think it's part of the promise of a startup, frankly, is hiring folks who are maybe more junior on paper than the role that we took them into. And we took a big bet on them because we saw something special in them. And they took a bet on us, particularly in the earlier days when we were less proven. And that has been incredibly fruitful and wonderful. And some of those people are, real leaders at the company today. I think the thing that we're still trying to figure out, we just hired our first entry level new grads. We developed a BDR rotational program. We haven't done that in engineering yet. And I'm curious to see, how we build that out over time, because I do, there's something about the flexibility and the AI nativeness, although I don't think it's necessarily true that just because you graduated from college, just because you're 22 today versus 30, that you're necessarily better at AI tools, right? So I think you have to kind of question that assumption, carte blanche. But there's also just like a set of things that come with having your first job and what it means to be in a professional environment and training. And so we wanted to make sure that we were set up organizationally to be able to provide that kind of great experience for people. And I think that's really hard to do when you're a small, fast-growing startup. And so, like I said, we've started to experiment with it in pockets. But I would be wary of saying, hey, I'm going to staff an entire organization full of people who have never worked anywhere professionally before and have not seen the movie.
Cool. We actually have a lot of time. So if people wanted to ask questions, we have a mic here, maybe come up here and then ask questions. I'll ask one more question before, we see if anyone on the floor. Well, there are lots. So 1.3 billion valuation raise. This is just announced last week, right? By the way, people came to this, floor. Actually, most of them either raised the money right away or got acquired. You are the first CEO coming to this floor and then, raise money before coming over here. But after agreed to come over here, yes. When you started the company, did you imagine $1 billion valuation? What was in your mind? And then help us to understand that maybe there's some roller coaster you went through mentally or company-wide. Give us some story about this sort of the ride. It's not a linear growth to 1.3 billion, right? So what did you go through?
People always get really excited about the value. People love valuations and fundraising here in Silicon Valley. And it's so funny to me because we're doing the same thing we were doing the day before. Our announcement happened to coincide with our product launch. And so that's the thing that we've been really talking about and really excited about. And so it's been nice because I've had a lot of press and folks who want to talk to me for the valuation. And then we're able to kind of pivot towards what I think is the more interesting story about what we're doing with it. I've always believed that the problem that we're solving, it's a problem that's been hiding in plain sight. I mean, it's actually really mind-boggling to me that right now the status quo in companies that, aren't using Scribe today is institutional know-how lives in people's heads, and it's not an asset that any company owns that they could query against or drive any improvements against. Why is it that we are just sharing things through oral tradition with each other? It's incredibly low bandwidth, but we've just sort of accepted that that's the status quo. And so I always said, there will be an independent public company doing what we're doing. I believe there's space for that. I believe that very strongly. We're the first people to do it. We are the leaders to do it. I tell the team all the time, it does not at all mean that we are guaranteed to be that company, but that is why we are here. That is the thing that we are excited by and motivated towards. I get asked a lot, did you ever spend a time, when you thought you were going to fail? And I've maybe an odd answer to the question, which is no, I don't spend any time thinking about outcomes I don't want. I have a personal manifesting practice. I think a lot about what we're trying to drive and achieve and what it'll feel like and what it'll be like for our customers and our team. And I just focus on that. Now, to your point, it's never an up and right journey. And I think especially in the early days before we found product market fit, we spent a lot of time trying to kind of iterate and figure out what the market really wanted. And I mean, I'm happy to go into kind of the story of those early days.
I'm curious, was pandemics a boost for the need of the software?
It's always hard to know the counterfactual. I think it helped elevate the problem in people's minds. Because if you have ever sat on an in-person floor, and I've done this just kind of for fun, if you just sort of sit and watch a bunch of people in person, inevitably it'll be about like 5 minutes or so before someone pops up and like looks at somebody else and says, hey, can you quickly show me how to do something right here? And that kind of quick interaction, that friction, maybe takes you 10 minutes or something. You don't think too much about it because it's your buddy. They're sitting next to you. It's an enjoyable conversation, whatever. As soon as that now becomes you sitting at home at your computer being like, ooh, should I send somebody a Slack message or set up a Zoom meeting? And like, who should I call? Like, you feel the friction more, right? And for the person kind of receiving a bunch of those pings on the other end. And so I think people being at home made both humans, like individuals, and companies realize like, oh my gosh, we have all of this institutional know-how and it doesn't live anywhere that anybody else can access. Yeah, I'll give you an example. In a strike of very poor timing, I bought my condo in San Francisco the week before the COVID lockdowns happened. And real estate prices plummeted and whatever else. And so I applied for my mortgage and I go to complete my mortgage and the bank couldn't do it. This was one of the really big banks. And my like salesperson gets on with me and I'm like, I'm being threatened with a lawsuit by the sellers for non-performance. Like, can you please execute these documents? And my agent was like, I'm sorry, like we have a center where all of these people show up to do this and we don't have anything documented. So I have no idea how to do it. And I can't reach the person who normally does it because we're locked down and they don't have like a phone at home. I don't have a way to reach them. And so there's no document anywhere I can go to find to figure out how to send you a DocuSign. Like that would have been something that, had COVID not happened, would they have realized like just how critical it would be in a business continuity space to have that kind of information? Like maybe not. So maybe that shined a spotlight on it, but the problem has always been there.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Do you gather data from all of your clients and then train AI on them to decide what you're gonna do with your products? And if so, like how do you take care of privacy of different things mixing together?
Yeah, so the question was about what workflow data we use for training models and how we manage privacy around that. It's a really great question and something we think a lot about. Yes, we do train models. We have built our own, we have fine-tuned our own, what we call a large workflow model. So if you think about a large language model, an LLM, as predicting the next word in a sentence, it's the way these things work. You can think about a large workflow model as predicting the next step in a process. And we published a paper. We partnered with a lab out of Carnegie Mellon University to publish a paper about our large workflow model. It's state of the art. We beat OpenAI and kind of, all the open source and everything else. And it's because we have perhaps the largest data set on real world workflows of what are people actually doing at work. Now, we have to treat that with the utmost privacy and security. And so this is part of our kind of licensing agreements. And so our enterprise customers, for example, we will not train our general purpose models off of their data. So it kind of depends on our user segment. But within the segments where we do have permission to do training, we've seen hundreds of millions of workflows at this point. And so that has turned out to be very valuable in training these models that are now incorporated into, the new product we just brought to market.
Thank you. Question. So I think we have more questions. I'm going to volunteer staff to tell me who's the best questions at the end of the session so that the person gets the book, The Venture Mind. Okay, please.
Congratulations on the latest round and $1 billion evaluation.
1.3.
1.3.
So, I was part of my marketing team.
The 5 million, are they paid subscribers?
5 million. We have 5 million users across all of our user base. So that includes our free self-serve and enterprise customers.
I see. So the decision to go horizontal from early on, did it help, or is that the first mover or some differentiating product attributes help? Which help?
So the question is, did being horizontal early on help us in
Getting to that 5 million.
getting to 5 million users?
What helped?
Yes, unequivocally yes, looking back. If I rewind back to very early days when everybody, including very smart investors, told me you cannot build a horizontal product, it wasn't immediately obvious to us. Because if you think about kind of traditional marketing playbooks, for example, you have an ICP, an ideal customer profile. And then you go and you figure out where do those people hang out. So if I'm going to target accountants, for example, I go sponsor the accounting conferences and I go to the the accounting magazines and like the accounting Reddit. Like you know where these people hang out, you know what's relevant to them, and so you can be very targeted in the way that you particularly go to market. Product stuff too, but particularly in the way that you go to market. Versus something so horizontal that is applicable at least across demographic lines to many different kinds of people in different kinds of jobs and functions in different kinds of industries. There's no single place you can go. There's no accounting meetup equivalent, right, for a broad ICP like that. But it is in some ways much cheaper to reach a broad number of people than it is to reach the two specific accountants right here and be hyper targeted. And so what that enabled us to do was to be much more broad and to seek much larger platforms in our marketing and messaging. And what we had to be very terrible as we thought about our ICP, it was really about ideal customer problem, not persona. And so we spoke very specifically to the problem that we were solving for end users in the beginning, and now end users and companies, as we've built out a more mature go-to-market motion. And so I think there have been more companies that have done this now. I think Canva is a great example of this, although, I think they still have a more narrow kind of ICP within the marketing department in a lot of instances. You've seen more of this now, but we certainly bucked real conventional wisdom in being so horizontal in the early days.
You mentioned that I'm doing a good marketing for you, but since you didn't pay me, I need to ask a tough question to you. What kind of companies should buy Scribe if someone should do an acquisition? What nature of the company would buy Scribe?
So remember how I said I don't spend any time thinking about outcomes that I'm not trying to drive towards? I've spent no time thinking about the answer to this question.
But what kind of company? Google or what kind of company would potentially be interested in this kind of things? I'm just curious.
Look, I think there's probably two angles. I think there are probably companies that think about productivity, maybe specifically or more broadly, but think about how do we drive employee productivity in different ways, who maybe have a PLG motion, would want a PLG motion, I kind of imagine that angle. We have and then the other angle, we have a very interesting data set on workflows that is very valuable as you think about building.
Actually, that's a very good one. Are you working with the large, the AI labs? Because they need a lot of those data, right? They are paying a tremendous amount of money for getting a lot of the data. I don't know about your data, but I'm just curious. Did they talk to you, reach out to you for data?
Yeah. One of the things that we're thinking about with our, with our newest product is, I said, it generates a bunch of suggestions or recommendations for improvements, right? And so one of those is automation. There's a bunch. You could configure your software better, hey, just standardize on this best practice. But certainly some category of it is hey, humans probably shouldn't be doing this. You could probably have agents do this instead. And so one of the things we're starting to think about now is partnerships with providers who can then do kind of that last mile of implementation. And we're early days. I don't know who that would end up being yet, but that could be some of the types of folks that you were talking about. Anyone who's kind of interested in that sort of agentic automation.
I can continue asking questions. Anyone raising hand?
I was going to ask
Okay,
a
over
question.
there.
I was
Okay,
going to
yeah,
ask
please.
a question about the automation part, but you already touched about that. Did your customers have or provide any insights of how successful they were in converting those workflows into actionable agents?
Yeah. So it's a great question. We released the product last week. And so on a commercial basis, the short answer is it's too soon. We have been working with design partners for a bit now who have been taking some of those recommendations and driving them into implementation. I think on the agent side for automation, this is probably a hot take. I don't think the technology is where a lot of people would hope and think that it is in being able to have kind of a general purpose agent drive automation within an enterprise. This is something we work on internally. Certainly like the boundary of something that we're continuing to try to push. But I more broadly have not seen outside of Scribe have not seen enterprises outside of like very specific use cases be able to say like I dropped an agent in and I was able to automate a bunch of these processes. And there are two reasons for that. One is the technology, which I think is getting there rapidly. Two is they don't have the workflow data. And that's the part we're trying to help them solve. Right. I think what we've seen in a lot of early AI, especially agentic automation experimentation is like, I dropped it in and like, I didn't see the ROI from it. Why not? And it's like, well, AI can't automate what it can't see. Like if it doesn't know the workflows, the different runs of it, what you're trying to achieve, the context of the work around it, and there's no way it would because that data set does not exist. No enterprise has that data set today. That's what we're helping them solve. It's really hard to actually expect that it would be successful in any kind of like broader application. And so that's what we're trying to drive our customers towards. But our first step is having them get the data and then know where to focus automation efforts. Because that's actually a big challenge right now for a lot of our customers. I caught up with a COO of a Fortune 500 company, and he was like, okay, I've been told by my board to pull out $100 million using AI. And I was like, how are you going to do that? I've known him for a while. He was like, how would I know? How do I know which teams and which workflows are a great use of time and which ones like we're not doing efficiently or actually could be automated? That's really easy to know in a small micro sense. But when you multiply that across thousands of people in a workflow, and we're talking about thousands or millions of workflows, there's no way to do that in a centralized way. And so what we're seeing a lot of kind of AI teams do right now is it's not quite eeny, meeny, miny, mo, but it's a bit of like, I don't know, this team like kind of spoke the loudest and wanted it the most. So like, we're going to start experimentation here. And what we're trying to say is like, let's have a data-driven way to make this decision about where you're going to spend your time and your AI dollars, because there's a lot of AI dollars being spent right now. And a lot of it is money going down the drain currently.
I have one last question, but before that, one question from the audience before we close.
If you just shout, why don't you shout and then I'll just
Hello.
repeat the question.
Am I audible now? Yeah. So my question is around like, so you mentioned that the app has a privacy filter that makes sure it doesn't capture PI information. So I just wanted to know like how well is it covering different demographics and geographic space? So like, because documents could be wide range, it could cover different languages and like.
Basically, how do you make sure you actually preserve the privacy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, this is an area where we've had to build it out in a pretty robust way, just by nature of the folks that we serve, like really big companies in highly regulated industries. And so, I mean, your specific question was like, how do you manage across different countries? Literally, the admins have pages to manage this. And you could say, I want New Zealand driver's licenses to never appear. I think So you can get really, really granular across, localization in different languages and nomenclatures in different regions and things like that. It's also really important. Like we build customization into that too, right? So a lot of banks will say like, oh, our account numbers are a 7-digit alphanumeric code. And so we're never going to capture any 7-digit alphanumeric code. Like
so basically there's some user configuration, not just the AI automatic detection, right?
Yes, you can add that on, right? Which some customers might not care so much about. Some customers will care deeply about.
Okay. My last question, because you are the CEO of a unicorn company and you have 2 kids, young kids. How do you do it? Because you actually talk quite a little bit about this topic on LinkedIn here and there. Can you give us a sort of a concise version? How do you deal with this work-life, not just balance, right? It's not even a balance. It's more than balance. How do you do it?
Yeah, work-life balance is a misnomer. I think having it all is the biggest lie that has been ever sold my generation. And I think it has led to some pretty discontented, if not frustrated, women, especially kind of my age. We grew up under the sort of Sheryl Sandberg, like do it all. I don't do it all. I don't do anywhere close to all. I do 2 things and 2 things only beyond like basic hygiene and sustenance for myself. I build my company and I build my family. I have a 1-year-old and a just turned 4-year-old at home, very rambunctious boys. And those are the only things I do. So I have outsourced.
So no wonder you don't come to meet me for coffee and I'm only come here for fireside chat. So that's great. So we should continue to do this, but still building company, and the building family, like what is the balance? Like how do you do it?
I hyper focus on those things and I outsource or don't do most other things. Okay.
So you believe that there is, for a typical person, there are a lot more things beyond these 2 things. So reduce other things is a kind of a way for you to.
This is what makes sense for me because of the phase of life I'm in. I'm in a building phase and I believe you only get exceptional outcomes when you focus. This is the way I run my company too. I'm like, we're going to do this one thing exceptionally freaking well, and we're going to ignore these 3 other shiny things at the moment. And then the time will come for those 3 shiny things and we'll sort of phase. But I'd rather do one thing exceptionally well than 3 things in a mediocre way. And so I run my life in the same way. And my set of trade-offs that I've signed up for, not anything I'd prescribe for anybody else. Everybody needs to make their own choices. I think the only sort of applicable headline that I would share for everybody else is you got to figure out what those trade-offs are for you and be really intentional about it. And my push would be to not try to do a little bit of everything in a peanut butter way, but to be very intentional and say like, these are the things that I really care about. And I'm going to really drive these parts of my life right now. Could be whatever you want. It could be a hobby, it could be your career, whatever. It doesn't matter. But be really intentional. These are the things I'm focusing on. And then these are the things I'm not focusing on right now. And I think most people do the former and then they don't do the latter, which like by definition kind of means they didn't actually do the former. It doesn't mean to focus on something if you aren't pulling some things away.
So practically you have less time or maybe no time for hobby beyond the family and then.
Yeah, I don't have hobbies right now at this moment in my life that don't involve my children. My hobbies are like going to local playgrounds and, playing kitchen with my kids or whatever. I don't spend any time on social media. I don't watch TV. I watch 1 movie a year. I don't go to events after 7 p.m. because my sleep is incredibly important and I have to like manage my energy to be able to do what I do. Like there's kind of just like a long list of things that I'd say quote unquote normal people do that I used to do in my life.
Manage your time very carefully. Hey, thank you very much, Jennifer. This is a wonderful chat.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it.